Hi there, back again. I wasn't going to do a two-part review of the Jag. I wanted to do it in one, but I'm afraid it got cut short because, as I said, I was having problems with editing on the PC. But we'll crack on. But there's another significant Jag from a film which I think you're going to recognise. Let's have a look at it. Ringing any bells to you now? I reckon it is, isn't it? Shaun of the Dead, and that is actually the V12 Jag, that one. And that was an incredibly fast car for its time, a bit dated now, but yeah, I think it suited the part absolutely perfectly for that film. And to be honest with you, even by today's standard, it's pretty quick. Well, for point of reference, what I'd show you is how they've evolved the Jaguars through the years. These are all the XJs. Obviously, Jaguar have had many more cars than just the XJ. But I just wanted to show you how they have changed through the years. And as you can tell, they don't really change that much. And the XJ40 platform is basically the XJ300 and the XJ308. They didn't really change it. So you can see there's a slight variation between the 300 and the 308. Which is my one, which is about to come up. Yeah, that's the 308. And then I'm going to have the 350, which is like a bigger version of the 308. And then it all goes a bit Pete Tong. Because now they look like Lexuses. And I wouldn't have one if you paid me. No, thank you. That's not a Jag.
Hi. Right. Back again. Now, I apologise for the abrupt ending of the last video. But as I said, I'm having editing issues with my PC that just doesn't seem to want to play ball. So I got so far with the video and I thought, now I'll quit while the going is good and I'll make a part 2. So we're not finished with it yet. Right, so we need to crack on. We need to talk about a few more of the problems on those cars, and then we'll have a quick walk round my car just so you can see that I've made some upgrades on it. I didn't really comment on them, but I think I should do because they cost a lot of money. So right, okay, some other things to look out for. The gearboxes are sealed units and they're good for about 100,000 miles. Anything after that you are literally playing Russian roulette with it. I would suggest you can check the oil, but you need to do it on site. You have to be underneath the car. I was going to go out and try and show you, but I'm not cooling around under the car today because it's not very nice out there and I just don't feel so inspired. But I'm just letting you know that 100,000 miles, fine. Anything after that, yeah, you got to be careful with them. So if you get a bit of service history over that sort of period, I mean, I've had one go up to 125,000 miles without a gearbox service, but you do need to do it, and you do need to make sure the oil's changed, and you make sure that there's a magnet inside that collects all the debris. Because basically the automatic gearboxes in these cars run, the only thing that meshes it together, and it's from pressure, and once it loses that pressure they don't mesh, so you don't have a gear. And also what you want to do is cycle through the gears on the J-gate, and if it bangs when you go into reverse or into drive, then you know your gearbox is on the way out. Good thing to look out for, okay? Sill Diffs. The differentials are exactly the same, they're sealed. Now I usually get a leakage around where the prop shaft comes in, or the half shafts that go into either side of the wheels, because you know they're a rear wheel drive car. Now have a look underneath. If you've got a leak, it's not the end of the world, but what it means is you do need to keep an eye on it, and they are yet again another sealed unit. Basically the XJ308, not the 300, are basically made for a market of prestige, but for a limited lifetime. I mean, they live longer and they can be looked after. Mine is obviously an example because mine's on 160,000 miles, so yes, they can live past that. But Jag or Ford, depending on which way you want to look at it at the time, because they were owned by Ford, thankfully not British Leyland at the time, otherwise the electrics wouldn't work, as I pointed out earlier, were basically given a limited lifespan because they wanted to produce a prestige car to a budget, and that's what you get the Jag. Now it's not to say that they won't last. So that's the gearbox and the diff. And the diff is obvious. You look at the back underneath the car and you see if it's leaking or not. If it is, not necessarily a deal breaker, but I would be sceptical, and I'd want to see some sort of service history with it. As I said, with the gearboxes, you know, I've just explained that. Now, there's also another thing with the X308s and the 300s, which they both suffer with, and that's Clattery. What's the best way that I can describe this to you? When you're driving it, when you go over a bump, it clatters at the front. And that's all to do with the suspension mounts and the joints. It's quite a common problem. It's not usually an MOT failure, depending on which MOT centre you go for, or what makes you know at the MOT centre. But it doesn't get any better. It only gets worse. I mean, my way of dealing with it, I've had it on 3 of the 10 I've had. Just turn the radio up and it doesn't really concern me. It don't really make any difference to how the car handles or how it sits on the road. But it's if you've got passengers and you go over a bump and the thing clatters like hell at the front. So do be warned. But as I said, that's not a deal breaker. So I wouldn't turn down the car for that. Now, I was going to talk about performance, so I think we should get onto that now. So, performance. The XJ308 had 3 engines. They're all the same engine, but they all have different performance. You've got the 3 points, they're all V8s by the way. Long gone is the 300, which I will elaborate probably after this to explain the difference between the 300 and the 308, because they look really similar, and if you don't know, to an average person looking at the 300 and the 308, they look identical. But we will elaborate on that in a bit. But I just want to crack on with talking about performance. Now, the 3.2 V8 pushes out about 240 brake horsepower. It will get you to 60 in about, roughly speaking, 8 seconds. And I think it's brought to heel at about 138. The one I've got is the 4 litre V8, pushing out about 296, bordering on 300 brake horsepower, and it'll get its fat arse up to 60 in about just under 7 seconds, and it's brought to heel at about 150. Now, I have heard there is a limiter on it. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I have heard they are limited to 150, but they may possibly get 154 out of it. So we're splitting hairs, and I've got a lot of them. And then we've got the XJ. And the R is the important bit, because it's the supercharged one, and I've had an XJR. And the V8 XJR, with the standard supercharger, which you can torque up by the way, but this is the 4 litre one, pushes out 370, and it'll get its big fat arse up to 60 in 5.4 seconds, and it's brought to heel at 155. Now, I have heard, that's on a limiter by the way, I have heard that if you took the limiter off, which you can do, everything can be altered as we all know, I have heard that they got 175 out of it. But that's more like an urban legend. Now, there's one thing you've got to bear in mind with these Jags. Just don't tell anybody this, alright? I've had 130 out of mine, and you would not want to be in it. The problem is with Jags, they have substantially only adequate brakes. Okay, adequate is pushing it, and at speed they start to lift and they start to rise, and the steering is so light. I would not recommend doing more than 120 in one of these. I could absolutely promise you, because they start to float. It's an unusual sensation, because I've not had that in many cars before, but they do tend to lift. Right, now the difference in them. There's not many classes of them. There's the XJ Sport, the XJ8, the XJ Sovereign, and the XJR. And there's a Daimler alternative, which I did have a Daimler, but it was in the XJ300 series, so it was a straight 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder. No, straight 6 4 litre. There, got there in the end. Sorry, tongue twisted. Now, the Sovereign and the XJ8 have the same suspension setup. They tend to, as I said, float. I mean, if you're interested in getting a slightly more lively one in terms of handling, I would recommend the XJ Sport or the XJR. They're very similar in the suspension setup is slightly lower, and they do tend to ride better. It's a slightly harder ride, but when I say a harder ride for a Jag, that doesn't mean much. But the Sovereign and the XJ8, yeah, they float. And mine's the Sovereign, and it does float. But having said that, I had a 7 Series BMW and an E-Class Mercedes, and even my Sovereign outperforms them without any issue. Jags have always been good at handling. So, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that I haven't mentioned on them. I think that's pretty much it. There's going to be a bit more to this video on explanations of just, you know, how they are as Jags and what they are, but purely on the basis I'm just trying to focus on the XJ308. And so, you know, you've got basically 3 versions of the same engine. There's no manual gearboxes. I can tell you why, Jag. The X300 had manuals. You wouldn't want one, because there is notchy as hell. I think the main reason that they just stuck with the automatic gearboxes is because they're basically trying to keep the car to a price. So if there's only one gearbox for it, and that's fine. But I've just remembered I forgot to mention, in the XJR, they've used a Mercedes gearbox. And I'm telling you now, from experience, they're a pile of shite. And you'd think that would be the best part about the Jag. German engineering, a German gearbox, a Mercedes. I think it's an E-Class or S-Class gearbox. It's crap, for want of a better word. And I don't think much of the gearboxes in the Jags anyway. I mean, they're not reliable. Don't get me wrong. They are an absolute nightmare. I even brought a gearbox for my Jag because I keep getting gearbox fault on the dashboard. And I eventually realised it's the electrics on it that were failing, because basically I don't drive it even. I don't ever use my Jag. I would love to use it more, but I actually use my MG. But yeah, so that's something to be mindful of. But bearing all that in mind, and faults of an old car, bearing in mind how old they are, I would recommend, if you were going to get one, I'd go for a 52 plate, which is coming up to the end of the line, 3.2 XJ Sport. I think you'll find that's the most reliable one, and because it was coming to the end of production, they shoved basically all the toys on it. So I actually had a XJ Sport. What Jag number was that? That would be Jag number... it's Jag number 8, probably. And it had more equipment on it than my Sovereign, believe it or not, because they're basically trying to pump them out. I've got to say about the Jags though, they're slightly dated in terms of when they come. I mean, I love them for being that, but in terms of when they come out, they were already behind the times. Their equipment and the functionality of what you had on the dashboard and how it worked was slightly dated even when it come out. I mean, the XJ300 was it was like an 80s car. Even when it come out in like 90s, they had ones in 96 up to the XJ300, and they just so square. But I'll show you this. I'll show you this in the rest of the video. But for the time being, I hope that has been some help and some insight into what I think an absolutely marvellous car. So, for want of a better word, take care, guys.
Alright, just a quick look round my car. As you can tell, I've put big bore exhausts on the back. They always have twin exhausts, but I thought it improves the sound and it just makes it feel like a whole new car to drive, and I generally think it improves the look. And I've put the mesh grille on the front. They have terrible grills on these Jags. I mean, that should be body coloured if it's meshed, but I want to keep the chrome and the mesh, so that's quite unique. And also, I put XJR alloys on it. So it had the original 17-inch Celtic alloys, and now it's running on 18-inch XJR alloys, which I just think finishes it off perfectly. Right, so we've seen Shaun of the Dead Jag, and we've seen Arthur Daly's Jag from Minder. Now I think that's enough. We don't need to go down to the Underworld one. This is the interior of the XJ300. This is the interior of the X308, which is mine, which is 1,000,000 times better. I want to show the engine of the XJR-6, which is probably the best engine they did. This is the V12, which, unless you know what you're doing, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. And this is the engine of the supercharged V8 Jag. Right, for the end of this video, I would just like to let Clarkson represent how much and how good the Jags are. So we're going to go on a drag race.
There's been a change in attitude too. I mean, this is the interior of the most recent XJ6. Cosy, isn't it? But there are one or two problems. The glove box, stupidly small. This seat doesn't go quite far enough back for my liking. And these switches along here, you can't see them. Now in the past, if you'd whinged to Jaguar about petty things like that, you'd have been lucky to escape from the encounter with light bruising. Not anymore. This is the interior of the brand new XJ. Now you'll note the glove box is larger. The seat goes further back. The switches have been moved. It's nice. Even though there's a telephone stereo combo, it has a traditional feel. I'm thinking that if this car smoked, it would have a pipe. But in fact, it has two. Big ones. From the outside, this car has new costume jewellery, new bumpers, new wheels, and underneath there's now a 5-speed automatic gearbox. So that's it then. Everything anybody could have complained about has been fixed. Great. But here are some serious sports cars designed to be fast above all else. There's a Mercedes SLK, low, sleek and light, with a supercharger for added zestfulness. There's a Porsche Boxster, a 2-seat mid-engined convertible. Ooh, and there's an Aston Martin DB7, big power under that pretty body. And lining up to take them all on is this. A 4-door saloon, a car that's about as sporty as a pair of Wellingtons. So it's Nike versus Hunter in a mile-long dash for glory. Before it was time to cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, I simply had to put my gearbox in sport mode and shut down the air conditioning.
Well, for a point of reference, I hope you've enjoyed the video I've done today. If there's any questions you want to ask, believe it or not, as I said, I've had 10 of these cars and I know how they work. That is an XJ300 that you're looking at, not an XJ308, by the way. It's just I like the look of the XJR one. But I hope this has been some help, and maybe next time I might do an MG ZT, I think, or I could do the Jaguar 350. It's up to you, but I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you. Take care.